If we've learned one thing about this game against North Dakota, it's that Jayce Brown needs the ball a lot more.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. I hope you had a chance to sleep and think about that game on Saturday. Kansas State squeaking by, defeating North Dakota 38-35, three-point matchup. Now of each 59 points on each side allowed and scored between the two games. We're going to dive into why I think there's still a little bit of positives in this, especially from Jayce Brown's point of view. I think you have to definitely get him the ball, although he had the ball a lot in this game. That needs to continue heading into Army Week. We're going to talk about Chris Klieman's post-game pressers. We didn't do that on yesterday's episode. I decided to take a little bit of a family trip for Sunday for Labor Day, so apologize about that. But we are back and diving in on this Monday. Happy Labor Day to you all who are listening on today's episode. And then we're going to talk into a little bit of leadership. I heard about, on the press game conferences from some of the players and the coaching staff, and I want to just get my thoughts on what I think this team's leadership aspect is heading into Army after almost losing to an FCS opponent. But let's talk about Jayce Brown, because I think that is the biggest takeaway that you should be taking from this game. If you want to look for a positive, because I think you should. And one thing Chris Klieman continued to talk about in the post-game presser was that it's very hard to win in college football, period, especially in this new landscape of college athletics, NIL, transfer portal. It's hard to get a gauge on what type of team a team is, performance-wise, or just what type of talent level they have. For example, this is a first-year coach in Eric Schmidt. He did bring back some retention from a team that only went 7-5 in the FCS, in this North Dakota squad, but put on a show against Kansas State. Now, you can say that it wasn't North Dakota that was showing up. It was Kansas State beating themselves. I wouldn't disagree with you. However, I do think you need to give North Dakota some credit here, and they showed up. Chris Klieman did mention that if you keep a team, if you give them life, they're going to stick around. He's got a lot of experience when it comes to that, when he's been in the FCS playing some of these opponents as well in his past coaching experience. But Jayce Brown had one of the best games that I have seen probably ever from him. It might be his best game when it comes to targets and receptions. I probably should have looked at that before we dived in today, but he played excellent. And that's something that I really think it's not getting enough credit, because the things you want to talk about is, we were playing soft, or the defense just wasn't there, or, when I look at the comments on YouTube from our show here, it's talking about all the negatives, which I understand, because this is a team that has Big 12 aspirations. This is a team that should be seen as a championship contender. This is a team that should have a Heisman Trophy dark horse candidate at the helm. And none of that is really living up to its jazz. But Jayce Brown, 12 receptions, 109 yards, averaged just over 9 yards a catch, did have a touchdown, one that went for 44 yards. Seems like that's almost the daily thing. If you're going to play a prop on FanDuel next week, you probably should put anytime touchdown score for Jayce Brown. Like, if you're going to do that, it might work out for you, because so far you're 2 for 2 if you've played that in the game so far this year. Jayce Brown has been excellent. And even when you go into the PFF scores for the Kansas State offense this week, it shows. It shows that Jayce Brown continues to shine. He is getting a lot of the snaps. We saw no drops from him. There was 3 drops total from the receiving core. One was from Tibbs, and the other 2 came from Garrett Oakley. The rest of the receiving, no drops. And that's a good sign for Jared Bradley, because of the drop that he had week 0 against Iowa State. But Jayce Brown continues to shine for this offense. And while Dylan Edwards is out, and dare I say, when he does come back, Jayce Brown needs to continue to be the primary target, the primary game plan, the Avery to Jayce connection, because they move the ball. They move the football. 16 targets, 12 receptions. And honestly, when you go back and you listen to Jayce Brown talk in his after the game presser, he talked for about 2-3 minutes with the media. The first thing that came out of his mouth was not that he was excellent. It was, I think I played a good game, but there was some things I want back. Well, there's 4 receptions that he didn't get, 4 targets that he didn't turn to receptions. And that's what he's thinking about. He's not thinking about those 12 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown. He's thinking about how can I get those other 4 back? That is next tier premier player. That is NFL level type thinking. And that is exactly what you need to highlight and spotlight, showcase every single week until they can stop it. Because North Dakota couldn't stop it. Iowa State couldn't stop it. They scored a touchdown. Jayce Brown scored a touchdown. They didn't just give him the ball enough. And that's where I'm getting at. It's easy to showcase against a North Dakota squad, a good North Dakota squad. I think we're going to wind up seeing that they're going to be a lot better than 7-5, even with a first-year coach in the FCS this year. But when we get the Big 12 play, dare I say, even when we get to Army this week, when we get to Arizona in non-conference, but still a Big 12 opponent, Arizona looked pretty good against Hawaii, 40-6. That Hawaii squad beat Stanford the week before. So we got our. It's going to be tough. We got our hands filled. The rest of the season schedule is going to be pretty tough, folks. Army just lost to an FCS school. Do you think they're going to be just giving up? Do you think a service academy is going to be just saying, well, we lost from an FCS school, this season's over? No, they're going to be playing even harder this week. Chip on their shoulder has never been bigger against a team that was 1 game away from making the college football playoffs last year. And then their first game of the year, they lose to an FCS opponent the following year. They have a lot to prove. And now they got Kansas State on the schedule. That's tough. That's really tough. And then Arizona, Brett Brennan's fighting for his job. And then you get to the rest of your Big 12 conference play. UCF, Scott Frost trying to make a name for himself once again in Orlando. Baylor, Waco, after losing to Auburn, but did Sawyer Robertson threw for 400 yards against an SEC defense. If you look at this secondary right now, I think Sawyer Robertson's going to have an absolute heyday if things don't get adjusted. But Jayce Brown and this receiving core impressed me. You look at Jared Tibbs, you look at that touchdown reception that he had where there was a deflection that should have been an interception, but he focused and he got the touchdown. If that doesn't happen, I mean, who knows if we're even up by 10 points at one point in the second half? Who knows? Who knows if it just starts falling down the drain and that you can't come back? That small play was a broken play, but him having that concentration and focus to keep the play alive and score a touchdown is absolutely huge. It's absolutely huge. So shout out to the receiving core, especially Jayce Brown. You know, I think Jared Bradley getting his 5 receptions on his 7 targets was huge too. You know, getting that nice touchdown pass against Iowa State last week, but you know what haunted him was that drop on 4th down in week 0. You know, because I think Kansas State wins the game against Iowa State if they can continue that drive, because they're putting points on the board if they continue that drive. Jayce Brown looked good. I want to see more from Tibbs this week. That's the receiver that I want to see on Saturday against Army. And then more tight end play. I would have loved to see Lincoln Cure. And I think we would have. He suited up, but we should have seen those type of players in the second half. Instead, we had Avery Johnson having to do a game-winning drive against a FCS opponent in week 1. Let's dive into more of Chris Klieman's press conference, what he said after the game on Saturday, and then let's talk about that game-winning drive. How it could be a career-defining moment for Avery Johnson. Is that a moment that you want to have against an FCS opponent? Is that what you want to be remembered for? Let's talk about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, I got a quick question for you, for really all college football fans out there. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, I mean, you take it back to the Snyder era, what hat would you be wearing? Yes, I said hat. For me, it would be the game. And there aren't just hats. They're same vintage styles that you wore back in the 80s and 90s. And guess what? They still go for the same price that they did back then. So I love the hat games. I've heard a lot of good things about them. Some of the hosts are actually getting some in the mail. I'm wearing them, and I've heard they still fit great. They still look great. I'm going to have to dive in and get myself a Kansas State one here very soon, because when you use the code Locked On, all one word, Locked On, you can get your vintage hat for $16.99. So head to thegamecaps.com, that's thegamecaps.com, to grab your team's classic bar or retro circle design. These things are so slick when you're going back. Perfect to wear at the bar, backwards like I do as well. And use the code Locked On for an exclusive discount, because legends wear the game. This episode of Locked On Kansas State is also brought to you by Game Time. College football is back, and of course, I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalry, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like it. If you used Game Time for the first game at Bill Snyder Family Stadium, well, I'm sure that you probably saved a good buck as well. You had some nice seats. You got that stress-free feeling knowing what your seats were going to look like, and that price you saw in the app was the price you paid. You can do that again in the Army game coming this week. I use Game Time because it gives you advantage for back to the fans. It is amazing. It's the easiest way to score last minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. That is the absolute best part. And I actually really like the zone deals too. You can pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. So take the guesswork out of buying of college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Chris Klieman of always speaks to the media right after the game and post-game presser there, and you could tell that he wanted to be a little bit more intense with that post-game presser. You could tell, but he showed his experience by kind of taking it back and being a little bit more calm and collected. As I mentioned in the first segment, he discussed how he wanted to make sure that he let everybody know that they're happy they got the win, because it's very tough to win in college football. But of course, they were not disciplined enough. They need to definitely improve if they want to be anything this season. And he mentioned it for all three phases of the football game. He gave his shout outs. He definitely gave shout outs, like we mentioned, to Jayce Brown. We talked about in the first segment, talked about how he believed the running game improved a little bit. But when he looked at the defensive side was what he really started to look at. And of course, this is before he got to even look at the film. So I'm sure when we actually get to hear from him again during game week here, he'll have more to discuss about this. And we'll definitely dive in here on Locked On Kansas State. But he talked about eye discipline. He said eye discipline for the defense was completely horrendous. He said we did a terrible job looking in the backfield and not paying attention to motions, to wide ends, you name it. And that's something that just needs to get fixed. And you're right. I mean, that's not going to fly against a team against Army. That's not going to fly against a team against Arizona. And that's definitely not going to fly against a team like Baylor in Waco, when we just saw some wide receivers. Like, I thought Cameron was going to be the top wide receiver for Baylor. No, that they have a lot more weapons than that. Trigg, I think he's a tight end, actually, is electric. What he did against Auburn was insane. And Kansas State's going to have their hands full in Baylor, and they lose by 40 points if they played like they did on Saturday against North Dakota. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. I think you probably agree with me as well. If you disagree, let me know in the comment description below. But if they play like they did on Saturday against North Dakota, I don't even know if we can beat UCF. And that's a tough pill to swallow. That's a tough one to swallow. So lots of improvements have to happen for Kansas State heading into the week. One thing he brought up that definitely made me think and, do a double take while looking at my iPhone, watching the press conference. I had to pause and rewind to make sure that's what he actually said. He said the game-winning drive, he discussed it, how they were calm and cool and collected to get back there, which I agree. You could tell that they were in a zone finally. And I wish that happened in the first, second, and third quarters and the beginning of the fourth quarter, where they didn't have to punt it with 4 minutes to go. But that last drive, you could tell that it was a gut check moment for this team. But one thing he said, and he said it's a career-defining moment, career-defining drive for Avery Johnson. Now, he did have an excellent drive. He did drive them down the field to get the touchdown, to win the game, a touchdown pass to Joe Jackson. I get all that. But if you're saying that you're a Heisman Trophy type candidate player, and since what I've been saying all offseason is a dark horse candidate, which I don't technically think that's out the window yet, because if you look at the stats, and what I mentioned on the reaction show is some of these writers don't watch all these games. If you're just looking at stats, Avery Johnson's still right there. No turnovers, 600 yards passing, 5 touchdowns. He's doing what he needs to do on the scoreboard. But if you look a little deeper and you actually watch the games, there's some issues there that I don't think puts him in the conversation anymore. But that touchdown pass to Joe Jackson to win the game, 10 plays, 81 yards. So he did it in just over a minute. Was an excellent drive. But having your name attached as a career-defining drive for a top-notch quarterback, a quarterback with NFL aspirations against an FCS opponent in North Dakota, and again, I mean no disrespect to North Dakota when I'm saying this, but I think you understand what I'm getting at, is that the tier of Kansas State football compared to FCS. There's a reason Chris Klieman took the job from an FCS school to Kansas State after winning multiple FCS national champions. This is obviously a promotion. I don't think I have to explain that. But I don't want to be tied to that if I'm Avery Johnson. So what I'm getting at here is he can't let that be his career-defining drive. Sometime later on this year, when it gets tough, whether it's in Baylor, whether it's at home in Manhattan against Texas Tech, whether it's in Salt Lake City against Utah, all those teams looked really good, by the way, and they're all on Kansas State's schedule this year. If there's a moment heading into the first half or the end of the game, and you got to make a moment, and the camera is shining bright, never been brighter, on Avery Johnson, he's got to make that moment count. We have to go into this offseason, hopefully with a good record, hopefully after playing in Arlington at the worst case scenario. But we need to go in this offseason and let me look back at Avery Johnson's season. When we have a complete episode just diving into Avery Johnson's entire season, because we'll do that. Well, it might be more than one episode. One of the biggest things we have to talk about is what was his defining drive, his defining moment of the season. And if I have to even bring up the North Dakota game in the top 3, then I think there's a problem with this offense total. Unless we completely just blow out every team, which obviously I don't see happening. But he's got to step up and make some big plays. He does. And when you look at the scoreboard and the stat sheet, if you didn't watch the game play by play and you're listening to me on Locked On Kansas State and you're looking at the scoreboard and the box score and you say, well, he threw for 300 yards, Christian. He did just fine. Go back and watch the game. I'm not an Avery Johnson hater by any means. If you're an everydayer, you know very well that I'm not. But there's a lot left on the table for Avery Johnson that we're not seeing yet. And we heard that in the offseason from Chris Klieman, where he said that there's a lot left to be discovered of Avery Johnson. And we think we're going to see that. I don't think we've seen that yet. And we need to. If we want to get back on track and we start winning football games the way Kansas State's supposed to be winning football games. I don't care about the box scores. We can go back to that Baylor-Auburn game. Everybody was watching that this weekend. Sawyer Robertson had 400 yards passing. Excellent game for Sawyer Robertson. They lost the football game. The quarterback for Auburn, Jackson Arnold, threw for 100 and something yards. I think he had 109 yards. I think that's what it was. They easily won the football game. It's not Avery Johnson that is the only reason that we're putting up Avery Johnson doesn't play defense. He didn't let North Dakota put up 35 points. I get that. But when you have a Heisman candidate-like player on your team, like Avery Johnson, you can't let them put you in a situation like that. Every opportunity you have to score, you got to make it happen. We shouldn't be punting as many times as we were. We shouldn't have to be worrying about fourth down plays as many times as we have in these last 2 weeks. We shouldn't be as bad as we were on third down like we have the last couple weeks. Third downs have been atrocious for us. 5 for 13 in third down efficiency against North Dakota. And then 2 for 3 on fourth down. A little better than, of course, the Iowa State 1 for 4, but still. Right? Still. We're talking 3 for 7 on fourth downs between 2 weeks. You just can't have that happen. Avery Johnson, I know, wants to get better. I know that he knows that he's not at his moments, even though he just threw a career high in passing yards. He's not looking at that and saying, yeah, that's my pinnacle. That's my ceiling. If anything, that should be his floor this year. What we just saw against North Dakota should be his absolute floor. If you go and look at PFF scores, and I'm not trying to bore you with a lot of these PFF numbers here in case you're not a data guy, but he was seen when you go to grades, if you're looking at absolute grades on the offense, he was the top player on the offense last week. Second, actually, John Pastore was first. He was the lowest guy on the entire offense when it comes to an offensive grade. He had a 43.7, and that's because of this one stat. And this one stat makes a lot of sense. The one stat that made him so low was the turnover aspect. And the actual thing is called turnover worthy play rate. There was 6 plays that PFF determined out of the all out of the passing plays that he had. He had 43 attempts. Yeah. There were 6 plays that they deemed worthy as turnover worthy plays. And one of them should have been an interception, as we mentioned with the Jerome Timms touchdown. One of them also was an interception if it wasn't for pass interference. That's in there. But those 6 plays, almost 13% of all of his plays were deemed turnover worthy. You just can't have that at all when you are trying to become a Big 12 contender. Put the Heisman things to the side. Big 12 contender. Top of the conference. College football aspirations. That hasn't gone anywhere. Especially if you would have lost this game, it's gone. But that hasn't gone anywhere. You're still 0-1 in the Big 12. Winning in Arlington gets you into the dance. Enough said. Let's talk about leadership. Let's do that next. Let's talk about what I think about this leadership room. And although you might think I'm talking a little negative right now, I'm actually pretty confident with what I've heard heading into this coming week. We'll do that next right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by Rougiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond that usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiet Ready. Rougiet Ready is the next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, well, Rougiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and it kicks in fast. On average, just 15 minutes, and those effects can last up to 36 hours, so you stay confident and in control when the moment's right. I love that it's completely online as well. Talk to a board-certified doctor. Get it to your door discreetly. So you can head to Rougiet.com/LockedOnCollege. Use that code LockedOnCollege to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege to use promo code Locked On College for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety effectiveness and manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiet website for full safety information. Let's finish up this episode on Locked On Kansas State. Hey, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We are growing every single day, and it's crazy to watch this grow. And the numbers for August were absolutely insane, folks. They were absolutely insane. On the audio side, shout out. If you're listening on the audio side, I'll give you a little background here. We more than doubled our numbers from our best month, which was July, to August. More than doubled. I'm talking like 150%. Football season is one crazy thing for Kansas State, and we are just absolutely killing it. I think it was the best month as well for YouTube. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Continue it. Keep coming. Keep diving into the comments. Keep joining the conversation. I hope I'm making you satisfied and having a good time joining you on your commutes or wherever you're listening to this show. It really means a lot, and I'm very grateful for you joining this conversation here on Locked On Kansas State. Let's speak leadership here, because that was a growing thing that I did see in some of the comments. And again, I read the comments and it helps me get some ideas for narratives, because if you're bringing these conversations up, that's what you're thinking about. And this show is to talk about the fans, to talk about the game in the fans' perspective. That's what I want to bring. I'm not going to try and bring you breaking news. If it's there, we're going to talk about it, but I'm not going to be the first to break it. I want to bring opinions. I want to be able to react to things with you. That is my goal on this show. And if you bring up something on a comment, or you hit me up on Twitter at Locked On K-State, wherever the case may be, I want to make it happen, right? We're probably going to do a mailbag here very soon. I think that's something we probably should start diving into now that we're starting to get a little bit more traction and energy over on the comment section. So we'll probably dive into that soon. Let me know what your thoughts are if you think we should do a mailbag. But either way, I'm looking at some of these comments, and one thing that keeps coming up is the leadership aspect, saying how they don't think it's there. And I think there's a little bit of a valid reason to think that, because you lost the game in Dublin and you don't see this fire that you'd normally see from teams of the past be about when they lose a football game to a rival. Understood. And then, of course, you just squeak by North Dakota. And then you hear some of these players discuss, and they're not mad about it. They're happy they won the game, and they're ready to move on. If you've watched football for years, if you've remembered the Snyder years, you're going to know that that is not the normal, trying to say this the correct way, the normal behavior that was once Kansas State football. I'm here to tell you that that's just not here at all, period, in college football or college athletics. It's not a Kansas State problem. It's just the way that the new era is of college athletics. It's just how it is. They are more focused on moving forward, fixing their mistakes, using data, using analytics, watching film, and moving forward. Their mindset, mentality is more calm and collected. And I think that's actually a good thing. It might not be the best feeling in the world for a fan when you're mad at home that we lost this game or only won by 3 or whatever the process is or whatever the situation is. And if you're mad, they should be mad. But you got to think, these guys are working to become professionals in their craft. So the next step for them is not to get mad and get out of this, feel out of the place. It's to stop, take a breath, and figure out how they are going to get better for the next week. Because them getting mad is just wasting time. And there's a game in 6 days. So I actually like this. Avery Johnson is the biggest reason I bring this up. Avery Johnson talked after the game for about 6-7 minutes with the media, and he was calm, cool, and collected. Obviously, he could have been irate. He could have been super mad about the fact that they only won by 3, the fact that he had to play all 4 quarters of the football game, because he shouldn't have. Avery Johnson should have played 2 quarters, and we should have been talking about how we thought about the quarterback 2 situation, whether that was Duff or whoever the case. But his leadership, I think, was on full display. When you go back and watch that, and you can check it out on YouTube, K-State put it up, I believe also on 3 and Go PowerCat, all those guys put up the thing. So shout out to them. It's awesome having all that kind of coverage on YouTube, and they're great channels if you are looking for extra Kansas State coverage. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that. However, when you look at Avery Johnson, the way that he assessed this, he talked about how he got with all the leaders of the offense and defense and said we need to be more disciplined. We need to fix our mistakes. That alone, I think, is exactly what you need to have. Just that. You don't have to call somebody out in the locker room or do something on the media. That's bad. It's bad things. We just saw what happened last week in week 0 when it wasn't even something with the team. It was something with Avery's family happened. And the entire world was talking about it. If Avery Johnson called out one of his teammates or said one position group, didn't have to even say a name, was just terrible. The offensive line needs to get better. If Avery Johnson said that, could you believe the news, the tabloids, the digital tabloids that would come out these days? You just don't need to have that type of issues, a type of distractions. Every single one of those players, all 105, 107, whatever the case is on the team, are on our phones the exact same way that we are. Every single day, reading stuff about Kansas State football. You can't avoid the distractions. You can try to mitigate them, and the best way to mitigate them is not to give them any fuel. So I actually like what Avery Johnson did, just focusing on the fact that they know that that wasn't their best football by a mile, and they need to get better, and they need to take the leaders and make sure that happens. It's not going to be one of those leaders that go and get the entire team on Monday, on Labor Day, before the actual practices start, and run them till they throw up. Like that's not this type of football, this type of world anymore. I don't know where you grew up, but that's something where I grew up. That was a thing. It's just not a thing anymore. But I like the leadership where they're at. Avery Johnson for one. Jayce Brown, as I mentioned in the beginning of this show, where he talked about not his 12 receptions, but the four catches, the 4 targets that were not receptions. That was the first thing that came out of his mouth. I think I had a good game, but there was things I could improve on. I love that. And if every single leader on this team, every single veteran leader on this team, and it doesn't have to be upperclassmen either, I think we're going to see some of the younger guys step up and become leaders. Devon Rice wouldn't shock me to be a leader. Logan Bartley, eventually, especially when you start seeing more from him, wouldn't shock me if he becomes one of the biggest leaders on this team by the end of the season. Wouldn't shock me. I'd actually love it. I'd appreciate it. It only means good things for the future of this program. But if they continue to be transparent, even if it's behind the scenes, so they can get better, then I'm all game for it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment description below. Tomorrow, we're going to dive more into some press conferences. I think we're supposed to get Chris Klieman to speak. Maybe we'll get some coordinator talk as well. We'll dive into it. And then I want to do a deep dive into Avery Johnson's conversation. We're hearing it all over the place. Buddy Drake Toll over at Locked On Big 12 had some thoughts about Avery Johnson. I think I need to discuss those. We'll discuss that. And then we're going to turn our heads to Army. We're going to be goldfish just like we were against Iowa State. And we're going to head to Army because it's time to go 1-0 this week. Let me know your thoughts in the comment description below. Hit like and subscribe while you're there. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.